Hello friends, for today's video I wanted to have a conversation surrounding some information that I came upon as of late, and I wanted to bring this to the table here as I definitely think a lot of you are going to be able to have other aspects of this brought to mind that maybe I'm not even thinking of, as this is a topic that I have not really seen discussed before. I definitely think there is a broader topic that relates to this that I've seen discussed quite often. However, this specific thing I've not really seen brought up. And the specific thing that I'm referring to is the idea of whenever we see those best of BOOKTOK lists or as seen on BOOKTOK lists, I'm not referring to when people online like myself are doing some kind of tier ranking or anything like that. I'm not referring to that. I'm specifically referring to retailers when they have those sorts of lists. The concept of those sorts of lists is not the problem. The problem that I am pinpointing is when books are on those lists that are not out. I wanted to kind of sink our teeth into this as maybe it doesn't come across as a problem, but the implications of it, I definitely think, are somewhat troublesome, or at the very least feed into and perpetuate certain ideas of the book community that I'm not a big fan of. So in order to get to what those implications are, I do feel like we need to kind of go through the evidence, you could say, and then also just kind of have a general overview of this, and then we'll be able to get to my conclusion. That said, because this is a conversational type of video, I do want to ensure that all of you are able to provide your thoughts. So I'm going to break this down into somewhat of a more structured way where we have chapters, and I'll have timestamps that coordinate to these things so that if you do want to comment, you need to refer back to a certain spot. Hopefully it's very easy to go back, hear a certain thing, and then you can kind of comment on that thing directly. Regardless, whatever your views are on this, I would love to know, but jumping into it and first starting with the evidence. There are two books that I wanted to focus on, and they do represent different parts of the equation. One of them I kind of maybe understand how it would end up on a best of BOOKTOK list, and the other one I don't understand at all. The one that I do somewhat understand is the new edition of Red Rising. I'm sure if you watch this channel, you're aware of this new edition, but if not, there is a new edition coming out of Red Rising by Pierce Brown. It is a stunning edition, and I have a guess as to why this popped up, and that guess is that Red Rising already appears on best of BOOKTOK lists. It appears quite frequently, as it's not only a popular series, but it's very popular online as well. So it makes sense to me that this one maybe showed up. It doesn't really make sense to me that this specific edition showed up. My guess is that if I'm giving a charitable assessment of this, it's that Red Rising is on those lists, and they want to push this new edition of Red Rising, so they're just kind of putting it on there. That's the charitable assessment, and probably a fairly accurate one too, but obviously, this edition itself is not a best of. Red Rising is, but I would kind of think it would make more sense if just Red Rising, that is already released, was on this list. You click on it, and then there's other editions, and then that edition, because that's kind of a combination. This one, to me, is not the most egregious. It's not representing the worst of this situation. The other one, however, is. And that would be the new book by R.F. Kuang that is scheduled to come out this year in 2025. That book is, okay, I'm not gonna lie. I don't know if it's just because I'm from the Southwest. I always want to say Catabasis, but I don't think that's how it's pronounced. I believe it's pronounced Catabasis, like the emphasis is in the middle. I'm gonna avoid saying it because I think I'm saying it wrong. Point is, this book's not out. No version of this book is out. R.F. Kuang is... you could almost argue, I feel like Yellowface is kind of commentary on this, which is by R.F. Kuang, that R.F. Kuang as an author is somewhat of an industry darling, and I think Yellowface is sort of a reflection on that, and also a critique of that very thing at the same time. And I also get the idea that because her books have been popular in the past, Yellowface as an example, the Poppy War series, and of course, Babel, these books have been popular before by this author, but this specific book is not a BOOKTOK darling because it's not out. And I know some people might liken this to, and in some sense, if they do, they might not see it as that big of a deal. They might liken it to on Goodreads, whenever we have the Goodreads Choice Awards, that sometimes books that are about to come out are nominated for the Goodreads Choice Awards. They still have to be released within a certain time frame. However, sometimes the end of that time frame occurs just after when the nominations start. So then you'll have, if I'm not mistaken, I'm almost positive The Lost Metal by Brandon Sanderson was an example of this, where you'll have a book that is just about to come out, it's nominated, which means nobody's read it. It's not really a reflection on books that people genuinely thought, based off of the reading of those stories, that those books were some of the best they'd read that year. And it's borderline not even a popularity contest that is an accurate reflection of what was popular in the year, because it's not out yet. So it's popular during the time that the nominees are going to happen, but it doesn't feel like a proper assessment. However, the Goodreads nominees, the way that the criteria works is that a lot of it has to do with how often people have shelved something as want to read. It also incorporates people's average ratings of those things, and because people do leave early ratings, especially for sequels, which that one, it's not just a fourth in a series, but it's also a part of the Cosmere. A lot of people were excited about it. People do rate things early, which is a whole other conversation that we're not talking about today, but people rate things early, and people were placing this on their want to read. It probably showed up on a lot of releases lists on Goodreads. So it was popular within Goodreads. So it kind of makes sense based off of their algorithm, you could say, their criteria for what is going to lead to something being nominated. It kind of makes sense. And at the very least, it is at least coming out within the year. I still don't like it, but the difference there is that we can kind of trace how it got to that point. And how it got to that point is all the things I just listed of people putting it on their want to read shelves and other such things. With the new R.F. Kuang book, the only thing, at least that I can think of, is that a lot of people have pre-ordered the book. Which, is that a best of BOOKTOK? No, you don't even know if the people who are pre-ordering it are people who are going to be discussing it on BOOKTOK. You just know a lot of people are pre-ordering it. And in the case of Barnes & Noble, Barnes & Noble has their own exclusive editions that they've started to do over the last couple of years. And they have their 25% pre-order sale that comes up quite often. And I think that during that sale, a lot of people have pre-ordered that book. A lot of people are probably also pre-ordering this Barnes & Noble exclusive edition. And at the end of the day, I just think that this is a marketing thing. But while, as I stated at the beginning, I recognize that there are bigger conversations that we've had about there just being a push. Retailers are just trying to get you to buy certain things, and there are things within publishing where they're going to back certain things. I understand that all of that is a conversation that's had quite often, but it just really irks me for a number of reasons. In order to really be clear about why this bothers me, I do want to get into why these best of BOOKTOK lists are so formative, you could argue, for people's reading and what they pick up. I do think sometimes the book community can, at least online, can exist within this bubble where they sort of forget that there are casual readers. There are people that enjoy reading, but maybe they don't have a lot of time for it. And there are people who love to read, but they're just not really online. And you often just have people also that like to read on occasion. There are different kinds of readers that exist, and we don't all have the same reading habits. But I think something that is true for a lot of readers is that people do like, at the very least, partaking in the conversation. That's why I think a lot of times people have work book clubs, because maybe they can manage time for one book in a month, and they would love to talk about it with people that are in their lives. So a work book club makes sense. And I also think it then makes sense that people are going to pick something that they could easily approach somebody else and be like, have you read this? Or maybe there's an adaptation that they want to see, but they want to read the book first. And so I understand. I know for myself, I'm going to try to have a balance of backlist and not as well known, newer, and maybe newer that's not as popular versus the things everybody's talking about. I like having a balance, but I also have my job centered around books. So I'm not going to try to hold somebody who's a parent and they work in the ER and they have hardly any time, whatever kind of person, fictional person I'm creating here, they're not actually fictional. They're a hypothetical, but people like that exist, people that don't have a ton of time to read. So I'm not going to hold them to the same standards that I hold myself to when it comes to trying to vary up my reading. And I recognize that when those people walk into a bookstore, or maybe they're looking online and they're looking at these retailer sites, they're going to see these lists. They might walk into the bookstore and they're going to see that BOOKTOK table, and maybe that's where they get their recommendations. Maybe they don't really know anybody else in their life who reads, and so they just kind of walk in, they're like, well, this is supposed to be something that's popular and good, and maybe I can get one of my friends to read this with me, or maybe I'm going on vacation and maybe I'll have something for the plane, and they just walk in and they see these things. So they have these dedicated tables, there's dedicated pages on retailers' websites, and sometimes it's just front and center in the window displays or right when you walk in. And I do think that there is something very positive about making reading something that is more a part of so many of our everyday lives. This doesn't just feel like this niche thing that if you're a bookworm, this is something that is unusual or a defining characteristic of you, but not really anybody else. I like the idea that reading is becoming something that is so a part of so many people's lives. And I do think that by having these sorts of lists, it kind of unites people. It makes them feel like they can, as I stated before, be a part of the conversation, and they can also share their thoughts, and maybe they can even find new friends by reading these books that are relatively popular. But for those of us that are maybe not necessarily falling into that camp, but we are people that are really tuned in to bookish conversations online, for a lot of us, myself included, I find these lists helpful from the viewpoint of analyzing trends. That is how I stumbled across this information in general, is because it is approaching mid-year and I like to assess trends sometime around the middle of the year and the end of the year. I try to assess trends throughout, but that's when I more formally talk about trends here on my channel. And I do think that this kind of holds a mirror up to not just what is going on within book communities, but it can be a reflection of a lot of other things to do with our lives. It can be kind of a reflection of society. It's a snapshot of us at that current time, and I find that interesting. I also think that you can then start to predict marketing trends as well when you start to reflect on these things, but it also allows for readers to be more informed when we're talking about things that we are tired of seeing, or things that we think need to be talked about more, things that need to be represented more. By analyzing trends, you're not just looking at what's popular, but you're also seeing what is not, and thus we as readers can be more informed in a lot of ways. The negative implications, though, of what I have witnessed, that's a dramatic way to put it, but what's going on with this whole having books that aren't even out yet being on best of lists, specifically on retailers' websites, the ways that I think that this is not only negative but goes against the positives, there's a few different things that I wanted to get to. First off, it decides that what is popular is based off of what has been purchased, not what is being discussed and read. I do find that on BookTube, sometimes how we discuss BookTok books is we zero in oftentimes on kind of over-the-top smutty books, or books that have really over-the-top, a really over-the-top premise or something like that. But if you look at what's popular on BookTok, there is a huge range of books. Yes, some of them include the really over-the-top smutty books. Sometimes they include those things, but they also include some epic fantasy. They include classics. They include hidden gems, and sometimes BookTok can essentially be responsible for bringing a book to people's attention, which is great. So there's a range of different things that get popular over on BookTok, and these sorts of decisions to have books that aren't out be listed as best of BookTok, it represents BookTok in a way that is inaccurate and unfair. It is essentially saying this is the best of BookTok because we saw a lot of people purchased it. That is my view of this anyway. And BookTok is having conversations about a lot of things. I don't even think it's that hard to make a best of BookTok list if you're a retailer, because if something is older and it's something that's very easily accessible, maybe you can even find it on library apps and there's no wait time, or you can find it on library apps where there isn't even that sort of setup and you can just check things out and borrow things whenever. there are certain things that are very accessible, so it's not going to translate to dollars, but maybe it's getting a ton of attention and a ton of hype. Maybe it's even something a lot of people bought before, but now people are rereading it and discussing it again. And you can just search hashtags. You can see how often those hashtags get used. You can also see when people have uploaded content surrounding certain works. And I understand newer works being talked about and they're going to have buzz around a certain time. So to be clear, I'm not upset about the idea of new books being on these lists. It's the ones that aren't out yet. My guess, maybe, as to how they have correlated this with BookTok is that maybe people have BookTok shops and maybe they're linking books, and so that's how they know and they can trace it back to BookTok. And maybe this is just me being pessimistic, I just think that they have certain books and authors that they're trying to push and that they want to present this on these lists because they know people see these lists. They know people sometimes go out of their way to look at these lists. Then they see these books there and then they want to buy them. I think that it's just all a means of trying to get people to spend their money, which leads to another negative, which is this idea that bookworms only care about special editions. We only care about new books. We only care about buying books and not actually reading books. And while I think that the consumerism conversation, which we're not going to get into today, it has come and gone. It fluctuates. We see it, people being critical of how bookworms as a whole are spending their money, and then people usually push back on that. And then it comes to the forefront again. And we're currently from my observation here, we're currently back into the being critical of how bookworms are spending their money, mostly because not even from other bookworms, but from people from the outside looking in, because it seems actually quite trendy for people to make videos dedicated or entire channels dedicated to criticizing how people spend their money, which, again, that's not the conversation for today. But I think that there are valid points on both sides of the consumerism conversation. I think sometimes people approach it with a certain thing that they're trying to get out of it, or they know their audience feels a certain way, and so they feed into that. So you kind of get these extremes of like, look at all these people buying things. They could just use the library. And then other people are like, well, not everybody has access to the library. And some people are buying books because they want to support authors. And it just goes back and forth. And it doesn't feel like there's the most nuance. But that said, there is some validity to the idea that people are just buying all these special editions. We're never reading any books. And it is speaking to this sort of almost lack of conversation and in-depth analysis about the things that we're reading. And then you have all these conversations about reading levels and people's how frequently they read and their reading literacy. And you have all these conversations happening. And the idea that something is popular because people have bought it and that's it, not because people are actually having conversations about it. And especially in the case of these two books, one of which it's just a special edition. It's not the book that is out. It is a pre-order at the time I'm filming this. It's not out. For the Red Rising one, it's just a pre-order for a special edition. And apparently that's the best of BookTok, is this pretty thing that we haven't even had in our hands yet. And then you have this other book that's not out. Nobody's had a chance to read it, unless I suppose maybe some ARC reviewers. But it's not like there's so many ARC reviewers that it would justify people. There's so many people reading it that it's a best of BookTok. That's not what's happening. We know it's not what's happening. It's just because people are buying it. That's it. And so it does feed into the idea that what we like. But what's unfair is I don't think any of us are fans of this. It's not like bookworms and people on BookTok are like, oh yeah, I love when the best of is just things that aren't even out. It's not like it's representing them fairly, but it is presenting this idea that that's all the book community cares about, when I think if we're going to criticize anybody, I think we should be criticizing the retailers. And I don't know if publishing is involved in this particular thing, if they've asked or pushed for certain books to be on these lists. But at the end of the day, it is, I think, something that is frustrating. And I have one final point, which is just that I'm returning to what are some of the positives of these best of lists. And within some of those positives, I was really focusing on the idea that it can unite people, it can lead people to discover books that, yeah, maybe they're popular to us, but they're not in the know when it comes to books. And so it allows for them to get to pick up things that they wouldn't have known about. When you have these books, on these lists that aren't even out, you're taking away spots for other authors who, yeah, they must already be somewhat popular if they're popping up on these lists, but there is a difference between, as an example, the book Half a Soul. This is something that has appeared on multiple Best of Book Talk lists that I've seen. This author is nowhere close to a Sarah J. Maas, right? There's a huge discrepancy. So while, yeah, there might be some popularity that's led them to be on this list, so maybe you could argue they don't need the extra boost, we're not talking about millionaires, the most successful authors who have ever lived. Some of these people, it's like, oh, they got a little boost. And I wouldn't want some of the people that have a little bit of a boost to miss the opportunity to get another boost because we're putting a book that's not out yet on these lists. Anyway, I know that this is not that big of a deal. It's not the end of the world. Anytime I have conversations about these sorts of things, there's a part of me that starts playing like whataboutisms, and I'm always like, there's so many other things to be having conversations about, but this is specific to the book industry and what we talk about here on this channel. It's relevant to trends as well, which is something that I like to reflect on and have conversations about. So I know it's not the end of the world, and I know it kind of sounds like I think it is based off of maybe my reaction to this, but I recognize it's not that serious. It just irks me for the reasons I mentioned. That said, are there reasons that it irks you that I didn't talk about? Are there things about this that you think are totally fine? Or maybe are there positives that I didn't even think about? But what are your views on this topic? I would love to know. I also just kind of want to throw out there that I wanted to do more than just a single trends video this year. I wanted to also dive a little bit deeper, which is this video is part of that, but I'm also going to have a couple other things pop up. So if that is a topic that you're interested, just be on the lookout. I'm going to have other videos that are somewhat pertaining to this. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.